Under the fractured moon, a single drop of blood traced the curve of her hidden blade like a lover's whispered promise. Elara moved through the shadowed corridors of the Frostspire Palace like a ghost woven from winter's breath, her footsteps muffled by the threadbare hem of her servant's rags. The air was thick with the scent of pine smoke and melting wax, but beneath it lingered the metallic tang of betrayal, her own, and that of the pack she had once called home. She was no servant, not truly, though they had forced the role upon her after the rejection that carved her soul deeper than any claw. Omega, they sneered, unfit for the throne's shadow, let alone its light. Banished to the sculleries, scrubbing the floors where alphas tread with their boots crusted in snow and ambition, she had learned to sharpen her edges in silence. The palace loomed as a fortress of ice-veined stone, its spires piercing the eternal twilight of the northern realms. Outside, the wind howled like a chorus of forsaken wolves, whipping flurries of snow against the narrow windows. Elara paused at the threshold of the throne room, her hand brushing the concealed slit in her apron, where her true weapon lay. A slender dagger, forged from lunar silver, its hilt etched with the faint outline of a crescent moon. It was her symbol, her secret inheritance from a mother long silenced by the pack's decrees. The blade had tasted blood before, in the hidden glades where she trained alone, but tonight it hungered for justice. She remembered the night of her exile vividly, as if the moon itself had etched it into her veins. The Alpha King, Thorn, had stood upon the dais, his eyes, storm-gray and haunted, averting from her as the elders pronounced their verdict. "Unworthy," they had growled, their voices echoing off the frozen walls. She had been promised to him once, in the fevered rituals of their youth, her Omega essence meant to soothe the guilt that gnawed at his regal frame. But whispers of her weakness, a supposed frailty in her spirit, had poisoned the bond before it could form. He had not fought for her. His silence was the blade that cut deepest. Left to die in the wilds, she had clawed her way back, disguised as the lowly drudge who polished their crowns while plotting in the dark. Now, as the great oak doors creaked open under her push, the throne room unfolded before her like a tableau of frozen deceit. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting elongated shadows that danced across tapestries depicting ancient battles. Wolves tearing at throats under a blood moon. The air hummed with tension, the low rumble of male voices plotting in the chamber's heart. Elara slipped inside, her bare feet silent on the flagstones chilled by the undercroft's breath. She carried a tray of mulled wine, steam rising like spectral veils, her head bowed in feigned subservience. But her senses, sharpened by years of survival, caught the undercurrents. The sharp scent of fierce sweat, the glint of hidden daggers. 3 figures huddled near the throne, their forms cloaked in fur-trimmed mantles, faces illuminated by the fire's glow in the massive hearth. Lord Garrick, the beta advisor with eyes like chipped obsidian. Silas, the scarred warrior whose loyalty had twisted into venom. And young Harlan, the ambitious pup risen too quickly through whispers and lies. They spoke of Thorn's downfall, of allying with the rival pack from the Shadowfen marshes, trading the king's guilt-ridden mercy for power's iron grip. "He weakens us," Garrick snarled, his fist pounding the arm of the empty throne. His endless brooding over past sins, letting that Omega witch slip away like a forgotten bone. "We strike at dawn, before the full moon rises." Elara's heart thundered, a wild drum beneath her ribs, but her face remained a mask of docile nothing. She approached, offering the tray with trembling hands that belied the storm within. The wine sloshed gently, dark as congealed blood. As Garrick reached for a goblet, his gaze flicked over her dismissively. Servant, invisible, unworthy. That was their fatal error. In the space of a breath, her free hand darted to her apron, drawing the lunar dagger with a whisper of steel. It flashed once, twice, 3 times, precise as the moon's phases. Garrick's goblet clattered to the floor as the blade pierced his throat, his eyes widening in shock, gurgling a question that died unspoken. Silas lunged, but Ilara twisted, the dagger slicing through the tendon at his knee before embedding in his chest, his roar cut short into a wet rasp. Harlan, fumbling for his own weapon, met her gaze for the first time, true recognition dawning too late. She drove the blade upward, through his jaw and into the brain, his body crumpling like a puppet severed from its strings. Blood bloomed across the white furs of the floor, steaming in the cold air, its crimson stark against the snow-dusted rugs. She stood amid the carnage, chest heaving, the dagger dripping in her grip. The throne room's silence was profound, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant uev of wind through the battlements. Her hands, slick with the warmth of their end, trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what she had become, an Omega assassin, reborn in rejection's forge. The lunar hilt pulsed faintly against her palm, as if the moon itself approved, its light filtering through the high windows to gild the blood in silver. But footsteps echoed from the corridor, heavy, purposeful. Thorn, the king she had once yearned for, now the architect of her exile, drawn by the scent of death. Ilara's pulse quickened, a mix of dread and defiant curiosity. Would he see her now, not as the discarded Omega, but as the blade that guarded his fractured throne? The door groaned open, and in the threshold stood the Alpha King, his silhouette framed by torchlight, eyes locking onto the scene with a guilt-shadowed intensity that pierced her to the core. In that moment, under the watchful moon, Ilara wondered if redemption could bloom from such spilled blood, or if it would only deepen the wounds they both carried. Thorn's boots scraped against the threshold, the sound a low thunder that reverberated through Ilara's bones like the first crack in glacial ice. He froze there, a towering figure cloaked in shadows and the weight of his crown, his storm-gray eyes sweeping the throne room with the precision of a predator scenting ambush. The torchlight caught the sharp lines of his face, high cheekbones etched by years of unrelenting duty, a jaw clenched against the ghosts that haunted his every step. Blood from the fallen traitors pooled at his feet, dark rivulets snaking toward him like accusing fingers, but it was her he saw first, not the servant's rags clinging to her frame, nor the tray overturned in the chaos, but the dagger in her hand, its lunar hilt gleaming with fresh accusation. Ilara's breath caught, a fragile thing trapped in her throat. The air between them thickened, charged with the metallic reek of death and the faint, wild musk of his alpha presence. Pine and storm and something deeper, like earth turned after a long winter thaw. She had imagined this moment in the dim hours of her exile, when the scullery's chill seeped into her dreams. Thorn, the king who had let her be cast aside, his silence a betrayal sharper than any claw. Yet now, standing amid the corpses of his enemies, she felt an unwelcome pull, instinctive as the moon's tide on her Omega blood. It whispered of bonds unspoken, of a connection forged in the rituals they had shared as youths, before guilt and politics had severed it. But she denied it, shoving the warmth aside like frost from a window pane. Fear coiled in her gut, not of his wrath, but of the curiosity blooming unbidden, drawing her gaze to the faint scar along his neck, a mark from battles long past that mirrored the hidden wounds she carried. Who? His voice rumbled, low and ragged, laced with disbelief rather than rage. He stepped forward, the fur of his mantle brushing the bloodied floor, leaving crimson streaks on the white pelt. The fire in the hearth crackled, spitting embers that danced like fallen stars, illuminating the tension in his broad shoulders. Thorn's eyes, those haunted depths she had once drowned in during stolen glances across the great hall, locked onto hers. Recognition flickered there, a spark amid the storm, but it warred with the king's ingrained caution. He was no unbroken alpha. Guilt clung to him like rime on his armor, the weight of decisions that had cost lives, including hers in spirit, if not in flesh. Ilara? The name escaped him like a prayer unspoken, his hand twitching toward the sword at his hip, though he did not draw it. She straightened, the dagger steady in her grip, its blade still warm from the traitor's end. The lunar silver caught the moonlight filtering through the arched windows, casting prismatic shards across the room. Silver on blood, on stone, on the king's unyielding form. "They plotted your fall, my king," she said, her voice a quiet blade, edged with the pain of old wounds reopened. The words tasted of ash, for in naming him so formally, she armored herself against the pull. Curiosity gnawed at her, though. Why had he come alone? No guards, no summons to the elders. Was it instinct that drew him? The alpha sensing spilled blood in his domain, or something more, a thread of fate woven by the Deusa herself. The wind outside howled in answer, rattling the tapestries where wolves snarled eternally under crimson moons. Thorn's gaze dropped to the bodies, Garrick's throat a ruined gash, Silas's chest a bloom of red, Harlan's face frozen in youthful shock. A muscle ticked in his jaw, guilt flashing raw before he schooled it into regal steel. "You did this?" Not accusation, but wonder, tinged with the melancholy that defined him. He had always been thus, ethical to a fault, his decisions haunted by the specters of mercy denied. The rejection of her years ago had been no whim of cruelty, but a concession to the Pack's demands, a sacrifice to preserve fragile peace. Yet it had broken something in him too. She saw it now in the way his eyes lingered on her, tracing the lines of defiance etched by survival. The air hummed with unspoken questions, the scent of his proximity stirring memories she had buried, the warmth of his hand in hers during lunar rites, the promise of union shattered by whispers of her unworthiness. Ilara's heart pounded, a visceral drum against her ribs, the cold stone beneath her feet grounding the whirlwind within. She wanted to hurl the truth at him, that she had returned not for vengeance against him, but to carve her place from the scraps they left her. Yet fear held her tongue, the fear of seeing pity in those eyes, or worse, the rekindling of a bond she could not afford. "Servants hear many secrets," she replied, her tone laced with bitter poetry, "and blades remember old promises." The dagger felt alive in her hand, its crescent hilt pulsing faintly, as if the moon urged her forward, toward him or away, she could not tell. He took another step, close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, a counterpoint to the room's chill. The wind's weavos echoed distantly, a lament for what might have been. Thorn's hand rose, not in threat, but as if to bridge the chasm between them, his fingers brushing the air near her arm. "You were never meant for this darkness, Ilara. Guilt cracked his voice, the king's facade fracturing like thin ice. In that instant, the instinctive connection flared, omega to alpha, rejection to redemption, a spark denied by both, born of fear for what it might unleash. Curiosity won a sliver, though. She did not retreat, her eyes holding his, searching the melancholy depths for the man beneath the crown. But shadows stirred beyond the door, footsteps approaching, guards perhaps, or more traitors drawn by the scent of blood. Thorn's head snapped toward the sound, his body shifting protectively before her, an alpha's reflex he could not suppress. Ilara's pulse raced, the dagger tightening in her fist. In the moon's fractured gaze, she wondered if this encounter was salvation or snare, a path to healing or deeper exile. The night deepened, and with it, the first threads of an unbreakable bond began to weave, resistant and raw. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The shadows beyond the throne room door coalesced into armored forms, their boots grinding against stone like the grind of fate's unyielding mill. Ilara's instincts flared, a primal warning that coiled through her veins like frostbite's bite. The lunar dagger thrummed in her palm, its silver edge still slick with the traitor's lifeblood, a crimson testament to the justice she had wrought. Thorn's body tensed before her, a wall of muscle and resolve, his broad frame blocking the encroaching threat as naturally as the mountains barred the northern gales. She caught the scent of his tension, sharp pine undercut by the deeper, earthier note of alpha protectiveness, and it stirred something unwelcome in her core, a warmth she had long frozen out. "Stay behind me," he growled, low and commanding, his hand finally closing around the hilt of his sword. The blade sang free from its sheath, a whisper of tempered steel that echoed the wind's mournful howl outside. His eyes, those storm-gray tempests, flicked back to her for a fraction of a second, holding a plea masked as order. Guilt lingered there, raw as an open wound, but so did something else, a flicker of recognition, as if seeing her truly for the first time, not as the discarded Omega, but as the shadow who had slain his shadows. Ilara's breath came in shallow pulls, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the hearth's smoky embrace. She should have fled, melted back into the servant's obscurity she had worn like armor, but the pull toward him rooted her. Fear twisted with curiosity, a dangerous alchemy. She had imagined his rejection as the end of her world, yet here he stood, not condemning, but shielding. The footsteps multiplied. 4, no 5, harsh and purposeful, the clank of chainmail a dirge in the chill air. Guards loyal to the fallen, or more whispers of conspiracy uncoiling from the palace's frozen heart. The door burst inward, splintering the fragile silence. 5 betas stormed the threshold, their faces twisted in fury and confusion, swords drawn, and eyes wild with the scent of slaughter. "Treachery!" the lead one bellowed, a burly figure with a beard crusted in frost from the outer watch. His gaze swept the room, landing on the crumpled bodies, then snapping to Thorn and the Omega at his back. The king, dead? No, alive, but marked by blood. They advanced as one, a wall of steel and snarls, driven by the pack's fractured loyalties, rumors of the king's weakness fueling their blades. Thorn met them head-on, his sword a blur of lethal grace. The first beta lunged, aiming for his throat, but the king parried with a clash that rang like thunder, his free hand shoving the attacker back into his comrades. Blood sprayed as Thorn's blade bit deep into a shoulder, the man howling as he fell. Ilara's heart slammed against her ribs, the visceral rhythm syncing with the chaos, the wet thud of flesh yielding, the acrid burn of sweat and fear. She could not stand idle. The dagger felt like an extension of her will, forged in the moon's quiet fire. As a second beta circled wide, eyes locking on her with predatory gleam, she darted forward, her rags whispering against the flagstones. The blade found his side, slipping between ribs with surgical precision, born of nights spent honing her edge in secret. He gasped, crumpling, but not before his sword grazed her arm, a shallow fire that bloomed red, warm blood trickling down her skin like tears unshed. Pain sharpened her focus, a reminder of her fragility, her Omega nature no shield against the world's teeth. Thorn whirled, his eyes widening at her wound, a flash of something fierce and paternal crossing his features. "Ilara!" The name tore from him, not as command but as anguish, his sword cleaving through another assailant in a spray of arterial red. Together they fought, an unwitting tandem, his broad strokes carving space, her swift strikes exploiting the gaps. The air thickened with the symphony of battle, grunts and clashes, the sizzle of blood hitting the cold stone, the distant weavos of wolves echoing the fray, as if the wilds themselves bore witness. Ilara felt the shift within her, empathy unfurling like a fern in spring's hesitant light. These men were no monsters, just threads in the tapestry of betrayal she had unraveled, yet Thorn's guilt mirrored her own pain. the weight of choices that stained the soul. As the last beta fell, his throat opened by Thorn's blade, the king staggered back against the throne, chest heaving, his fur mantle torn and bloodied. Silence descended, heavy as snowfall, broken only by their ragged breaths. Alara sheathed her dagger in the hidden fold of her apron, the lunar hilt cooling against her thigh like a secret shared. Her arm throbbed, the wound a stark line against her pale skin. But it was the king's proximity that burned hotter. He turned to her, sword lowering, his gaze tracing the crimson path down her limb. "You're hurt," he murmured, the words rough with unspoken apology. His hand reached out, hesitating before gently clasping her elbow, the touch electric, a spark across the chasm of years. The warmth of his palm seeped through her, countering the room's chill, stirring the instinctive bond she had denied. Omega to Alpha, it whispered, not of possession, but of mutual salvage. Born from the fear of isolation and the curiosity of what lay beneath his melancholy armor. She met his eyes, searching the depths where guilt swirled like storm clouds over the peaks. "A scratch," she whispered, though her voice trembled, the lie thin as winter ice. In that touch, empathy bloomed, his pain for her exile, her rage at his silence, transforming into a fragile thread. Resistant, yet insistent. The moon's light slanted through the windows, gilding the blood on the floor in silver, illuminating the scar on his neck that spoke of battles she had never shared. Why protect her now, this broken king who had let her fall? The question hung between them, unanswered, as the wind outside softened to a sigh. Thorn's thumb brushed her skin, a gesture of tenderness amid the carnage, his ethical core warring with the duty that had chained him. "We cannot stay here. More will come. The elders, the rivals from the marshes, they sense weakness like wolves scent blood." His voice held a quiet resolve, the melancholy king revealing the strategist beneath. He glanced at the throne, empty and accusing, then back to her. The pull undeniable. "Come with me to the old refectory, hidden in the undercroft. It's defensible, warded by ancient runes. We face this together." Alara's pulse quickened, the offer a crossroads. Flee into the night alone, or step into the snare of alliance with the man who had shattered her world. The lunar dagger pulsed faintly, as if the Deusa urged her onward toward redemption's uncertain flame. Fear clawed at her, but so did the budding bond, empathy weaving through the pain like roots through frozen earth. She nodded once, the choice a quiet defiance. As they slipped from the throne room, his hand lingering at her back to steady her, the palace's shadows swallowed them whole, the first fragile sanctuary born from shared blood and unspoken vows. The undercroft's chill wrapped around them like a shroud, but in the dim torchlight of the refectory, Alara felt the stirrings of something warmer. A bond forged not in ceremony, but in the raw poetry of survival. The undercroft's refectory was a forgotten vein in the palace's frozen heart, its walls etched with runes that glowed faintly under the torch's hesitant flame, warding off the outer world's encroaching chill. Alara leaned against a weathered oak table, the wood scarred by centuries of communal feasts now reduced to echoes, her wounded arm throbbing in rhythm with her pulse. The shallow gash wept crimson beads that traced her skin like reluctant confessions, but it was the king's nearness that unsettled her most. Thorn, seated across from her on a splintered bench, his massive frame hunched as if the crown's weight pressed him into the stone. The air down here carried the musty scent of damp earth and ancient incense, mingled with the fading copper of blood from the throne room above. Wind seeped through unseen cracks, a low moan that mimicked the huevos of distant wolves, as if the wilds mourned the fragile truce they had forged. Thorn unbound a strip of linen from his own torn mantle, his movements deliberate, almost reverent, as he reached for her arm. His fingers, calloused from sword and scepter, brushed her skin with a gentleness that belied the alpha storm within him. "Let me," he murmured, his voice a gravelly timbre that resonated through the dim space, stirring the embers of old longings she had buried deep. Guilt shadowed his eyes, those storm-gray pools where melancholy swirled like mist over the northern peaks. But there was no pity there, only the raw ethical core of a king who had learned mercy's cost too late. Ilara tensed, the instinctive pull toward him warring with the scars of rejection. She had clawed her way back from exile on her own terms, not to be tended like a fragile bloom. Yet curiosity held her still, the warmth of his touch seeping into her cold flesh, awakening sensations she had rationalized away as weakness. As he bound the wound, his thumb grazed the pulse at her wrist, and something shifted, a subtle tremor in the air like the hush before a lunar eclipse. Ilara's vision blurred at the edges, the runes on the walls flaring brighter, their silver lines pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Pain from the cut intensified, not as agony, but as a key turning in a long sealed lock. Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading outward like fire through frozen veins, and suddenly the world sharpened into crystalline clarity. Whispers unfurled in her mind, not her own, but echoes from the ether, fragments of destinies intertwined, betrayals yet to unfold. She saw it then, unbidden. Thorn's path, a labyrinth of shadowed alliances and bloodied thrones, culminating in a vision of him fallen, his crown shattered under a rival's claw, the pack splintered by the very guilt that now hollowed his gaze. But woven through the darkness was a thread of light, her thread, Omega essence amplified by the moon's hidden grace, guiding him toward redemption, a union that could heal the fractures in his soul and the realms. The revelation crashed over her like a glacial wave, her breath hitching as the lunar dagger in her apron's fold hummed against her thigh, its crescent hilt alive with ethereal warmth. This was her dam occulto, the Pathfinder's gift she had always sensed but never claimed, a seer's intuition forged in rejection's forge, allowing her to glimpse the Deuce's weave of fate. Not mere survival instinct, but a spiritual compass, revealing paths where others saw only peril. Ilara gasped, her free hand clutching the table's edge, the wood biting into her palm as the visions receded, leaving her trembling. The air tasted of ozone and wild honey, the scent of divine intervention, and in that moment she understood. She was no mere assassin, but the key to his destiny, the Omega born to illuminate the king's buried light. Thorn froze, his binding hand stilling as he inhaled sharply, his alpha senses catching the shift in her aura, the sudden bloom of power that scented the air like moonlight on fresh snow. His eyes widened, locking onto hers with an intensity that stripped away the veils between them. "What? What was that?" he demanded, not in fear but in awe, his voice laced with the melancholy wonder of a man glimpsing salvation's edge. He released her arm but did not retreat, leaning closer, the heat of his body a counterpoint to the Undercroft's bite. In his gaze, recognition dawned, profound and piercing. He had felt it too, the instinctive bond surging like a river breaking its banks, revealing her as more than the servant he had overlooked, more than the exile he had failed. She was the revelation he had sought in endless nights of guilt-ridden vigil, the Omega whose hidden light could redeem his fractured reign, turning his wounds into wisdom, his duty into destiny. Ilara pulled back slightly, the weight of the vision pressing on her chest like an unseen crown. Fear coiled anew, not of the power, but of its implications. To embrace this gift meant stepping fully into his world, rationalizing away the resistance that had armored her heart. "It's nothing," she lied, her voice a whisper edged with poetic defiance, though her eyes betrayed the truth, shimmering with unshed tears. The dagger's hum faded, but the bond lingered, empathy transforming into something deeper, a spiritual tether that whispered of choices yet to come. Thorn's hand hovered near hers, ethical restraint holding him back. Yet his melancholy softened, replaced by a quiet resolve. No, Alara. It's everything. You've always been the light I couldn't see, the key to breaking this curse of guilt that chains me. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken philosophy. What was strength, if not yielding to the mercy of fate? Outside, the wind rose to a feral howl, rattling the refectory's iron-barred door as if the Dusa herself tested their fragile sanctuary. Footsteps echoed faintly from the corridors above, pursuers closing in, the palace's intrigue uncoiling like a serpent in the snow. Thorn rose, his silhouette framed by the torch's glow. But his eyes never left her, the realization etching a new scar on his soul. She was his redemption, not as reward, but as the trial he must earn. Alara's heart ached with the dilemma: embrace the destiny that bound them, or sever it to reclaim her solitary freedom. The moon's fractured light seeped through a high grate, gilding the blood on her bandage in silver, a symbol of paths converging under its watchful eye. In that suspended breath, the Undercroft felt less like refuge and more like Revelation's altar, where love's proof began to etch itself in fire and frost. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The Undercroft's fragile peace shattered like thin ice under a wolf's paw, the iron-barred door groaning as booted feet thundered from the corridors above. Alara's vision still hummed with the afterglow of her revelation, the Pathfinder's gift coiling through her veins like moonlight threading silver veins in the earth. But there was no time to savor it. The air thickened with the acrid bite of torches and the low growl of approaching fury. Thorn surged to his feet, his sword already in hand, the blade catching the rune light in a flash of ancient steel. His eyes met hers, storm-gray and resolute, the guilt that had etched his features now tempered by a fierce protectiveness that both drew and repelled her. "They've found us," he said, voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone. "The elders and their shadows. Stay close. The past comes to claim its due." She nodded, the lunar dagger slipping into her palm with instinctive grace, its crescent hilt warm against her skin as if the moon itself armed her for this reckoning. The wound on her arm pulsed in sympathy, a reminder of the blood already spilled, but the fear that gripped her was not for her life. It was for the choice looming like a storm front over the peaks. Freedom had been her solitary flame in exile, a hard-won liberty forged in rejection's cold forge. Yet here, in the king's shadowed gaze, love whispered of chains disguised as redemption, a bond that demanded forgiveness for the silence that had banished her. The wind howled through the grate above, carrying the distant weavos of the pack, a chorus that mourned the fractures in their world. The door buckled under a ram's assault, runes flaring in protest before splintering into ethereal sparks that danced like dying fireflies. In poured the confrontation, a tide of fur-clad figures led by Elder Voss, the pack's iron-fisted patriarch, his face a mask of weathered stone and righteous scorn. Flanking him were the remnants of the loyalists, betas with eyes hardened by years of whispered allegiances, and at the rear loomed Ragnar, the rival alpha from the Shadowfen marshes, his massive form a silhouette of coiled menace, eyes gleaming with the hunger of one who scented weakness. Ragnar's pelt was matted with marsh mud and fresh blood, his presence a foul undercurrent to the clean bite of northern frost. Betrayer of old packs, the one who had poisoned the whispers against her, turning Thorn's guilt into a weapon for his own ascension. "Voss!" Thorn growled, stepping forward to shield her, his sword raised in a barrier of unyielding steel. The torchlight from the invaders cast elongated shadows that writhed across the refectory walls, turning the space into a cavern of judgment. "You bring the marsh's filth into our heart. This is no trial. It's treason unveiled." His voice carried the weight of his ethical core, the melancholy king who had always chosen duty over desire, but now it cracked with the raw edge of a man confronting the ghosts he had let fester. Elder Voss's laugh was a dry rasp, like wind-scouring bone. He gestured to the fallen guard's blood still staining Thorn's mantle, his eyes narrowing on Alara's form behind the king. Treason. You speak of shadows, Thorn, while your own house reeks of it. This servant, he spat the word like venom, slaughters our kin in the throne room, and you harbor her? The pack demands reckoning, the Omega Witch who defies her place. His gaze bored into her, recognition dawning with malicious glee. Alara, the discarded, we thought you perished in the wilds, as you should have, but here you stand, blade in hand, unraveling what we've built. Ragnar stepped forward, his bulk filling the doorway, the scent of stagnant water and ambition rolling off him like fog. He was the true traitor, the one whose spies had fueled the Elder's doubts years ago, twisting her Omega gentleness into tales of frailty to weaken Thorn's claim. The king is broken, Ragnar snarled, his voice a guttural thunder that echoed the storm outside. Guilt over his failures, over you, little Omega, has made him soft. Join us, Voss, and the marshes will swallow this frozen waste, or die defending a crown stained by mercy's folly. His eyes locked on Alara, a predatory gleam that stirred her deepest rage. He had been the architect of her exile. His lies the blade that severed her from Thorn's side. The betas advanced, swords drawn, the clash inevitable as the moon's pull on the tide. Thorn met them with a roar that shook the rafters, his blade singing through the air in arcs of lethal precision. Steel met steel in a cacophony that drowned the wind's lament, blood spraying hot and slick across the stone, first a beta's arm, then another's throat, the crimson blooming like roses in winter snow. Alara fought at his flank, the lunar dagger a silver whisper amid the chaos, its edge finding gaps in armor with the clarity of her newfound gift. She glimpsed futures in the fray. Voss's fall leading to pack unity, or Ragnar's victory splintering them into endless war. Pain lanced her side as a blade grazed her ribs, but she twisted, driving the dagger into her assailant's chest, the warmth of his blood mingling with the cold sweat on her skin. Thorn battled Ragnar directly, their clash a tempest of fury. Alpha against alpha, guilt against greed. The rival's axe swung wide, carving furrows in the table, but Thorn parried, his movements fueled by the ethical fire that had always defined him. "You poisoned us all," Thorn accused, his voice ragged over the din, "twisting my mercy into weakness. But she—" He glanced at Alara, eyes fierce with unspoken plea. "She shows me truth." The words hung amid the grunts and clashes, a philosophy etched in blood. What was power, if not the choice to forgive and rebuild? Voss lunged at Alara, his dagger aimed for her heart. But she saw it coming, the vision flashing like lightning. His betrayal rooted in fear of change, a chance for redemption if she spared him. The blade met his, twisting it aside, and she could have ended him, driven the lunar silver home. Freedom screamed for it. Kill the past, walk away unburdened. But love, that resisted flame, urged mercy. Forgiving Voss meant binding herself to Thorn's world, to the pack's healing, at the cost of her solitary path. Her hand trembled, the dagger hovering at his throat, blood trickling from a shallow cut. "Choose," she whispered, voice breaking like frost under dawn. "War or peace, your hand in this decides." Voss faltered, eyes widening at the seer's light in her gaze, the Pathfinder's aura flaring silver around her. Ragnar bellowed, breaking from Thorn to charge, but the king intercepted, his sword plunging deep into the rival's side. Blood poured, steaming on the cold floor, Ragnar collapsing with a final gurgling curse. The betas wavered, Voss dropping his weapon, the confrontation fracturing like the Undercroft's wards. Silence fell, broken only by heaving breaths and the drip of blood. The moon's light seeping through the grate to gild the carnage in ethereal silver. Alara lowered her dagger, the choice made in that suspended breath. Mercy over vengeance, love's proof over freedom's isolation. But as Thorn turned to her, his face blood-streaked and haunted, guilt mingling with gratitude, she felt the weight of it settle like a crown of thorns. Forgiveness bound them, yet war's shadow lingered. The pack's fractures ran deep, and her gift revealed no easy dawn. In his eyes, she saw the dilemma mirrored. To embrace this union was to wage war on his own past, or lose her to the wilds once more. The wind outside softened to a whisper, but the ethical storm within them raged on, a spiritual trial under the moon's unblinking watch. The Undercroft silence pressed in like a held breath, the air heavy with the copper tang of blood and the faint, acrid smoke of extinguished torches. Ilara stood amid the fallen, her lunar dagger limp in her hand, its crescent hilt cooling against her palm like a fading heartbeat. The runes on the walls flickered one last time, their silver glow dimming to embers as if the Jusa herself withdrew her gaze, leaving only the raw aftermath of choice. Voss knelt in surrender, his weathered face etched with the shock of mercy unearned, while the surviving betas shifted uneasily, their weapons lowered, but eyes darting to Thorn, the king who had just slain their rival's shadow. Ragnar's body lay sprawled near the splintered door, his blood pooling in dark rivulets that snaked toward the grate overhead, where moonlight filtered through like fractured promises. Ilara's chest ached, not from the graze on her ribs or the deeper throb of her bound arm, but from the weight of the path she had chosen. Mercy had been no easy gift. It was a sacrifice, carving away the solitary freedom she had forged in exile's frozen wilds. Sparing Voss meant weaving herself into the pack's fractured tapestry, binding her Omega spirit to the very throne that had rejected her. Yet in that act, a quiet healing stirred, empathy's slow bloom, turning the pain of old wounds into something shared, something redemptive. She met Thorn's gaze across the carnage, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the moon's pale light, haunted no longer by isolation, but by the dawning realization of what they might become together. Guilt still clung to him like frost on his bloodied mantle, but it softened now, tempered by the ethical fire that had always burned beneath his melancholy crown. He sheathed his sword with a deliberate motion, the steel whispering home like a vow sealed. Stepping over Ragnar's form, Thorn approached her, his boots leaving crimson prints on the stone, each one a testament to the war they had waged, not just against traitors, but against the despair that had sundered them. The wind outside had stilled to a hush, as if the northern gales held vigil, waiting for the rebirth that hung between them. "Ilara," he said, his voice a low cadence, resonant with the philosophy of a king reborn. What was destiny, if not the liberty to choose compassion over conquest? His hand extended, palm upturned, scarred from battles and burdens, offering not command, but union. A partnership where her Pathfinder's light could guide his shadowed reign, healing the pack's divides through the strength of their intertwined fates. She hesitated, the dagger's weight a reminder of her hidden power, the visions that had revealed this moment as inevitable yet earned. Faith had warred with despair in her soul, the moon's symbols urging her toward him, the silver hilt etched with crescents, now stained with the blood of redemption, mirroring the scars they both bore. Rejection had been her crucible, birthing not weakness, but a seer's clarity, a gift that transcended hierarchies. To accept him meant surrendering the illusion of solitary power, embracing love as proof, a trial of vulnerability amid the throne's unyielding steel. Her heart pounded, visceral and true, the instinctive bond flaring like fire through ice, resisted no longer but rationalized as the Deusa's weave. Curiosity had led her here, from the throne room's shadows to this Undercroft altar, and now it yielded to acceptance, the Omega in her recognizing the Alpha's ethical core as kin to her own resilient spirit. With a breath that tasted of frost and wild pine, Ilara placed her hand in his. the touch igniting a warmth that spread through her veins, chasing away the chill of exile. His fingers closed around hers, firm yet tender, the calluses a map of shared suffering. In that union, the air hummed with spiritual renewal, the runes pulsing once more, faint silver threads connecting them like lunar veins. Thorn drew her closer, his free hand brushing a stray lock from her face, his eyes searching hers with a depth that pierced the soul. "You've healed what I could not," he murmured, the words laced with tragic poetry. "Turning my guilt to grace, my throne to sanctuary. Together, we rebuild, not as king and servant, but as equals under the moon's mercy." The pack stirred around them, Voss rising slowly, his voice a gravelly concession. "The Deusa has spoken through her light. The fractures end here, loyalty to the true path." The betas murmured assent, the tension easing like snow melting under dawn's hesitant sun, though shadows of war lingered in the distant howls that echoed from the marshes. Ilara felt the Renascimento take root, a rebirth not of triumph, but of quiet sacrifice. Her freedom yielded for the pack's healing, his isolation broken by the compassion she embodied. The lunar dagger slipped back into her apron, its hilt now a symbol of their union, bloodied yet purified, a beacon against despair. As they ascended from the undercroft, Thorn's arm steady at her back, the palace's corridors unfolded before them like veins awakening to new life. Moonlight spilled through high windows, gilding the stone in silver and casting long shadows that danced no longer in deceit, but in harmony. Ilara's steps matched his, the rhythm of their bond a counterpoint to the wind's soft sigh outside, where snow began to fall in gentle veils, blanketing the wounds of the night. In his presence, she glimpsed the future her gift revealed, a realm mended by choices of mercy, where love proved not a reward, but the forge of enduring strength. The throne awaited, no longer a seat of isolation, but a shared flame, kindled by the Omega who had risen from servant's rags to destiny's heart. Yet even in this healing, a whisper of dilemma lingered, an ethical echo reminding them that redemption was eternal vigil, faith's flame against the encroaching dark. Under the fractured moon, their union bloomed, tragic and triumphant, a testament to souls entwined in the Deusa's eternal dance. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.